Right now, Orban was firmly put in his place. Kyiv drove Hungary away. A loud decision by the EU. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces smashed Russia. Ukrainian fighters completely destroyed the enemy's major targets. This is something you need to see. The enemy's equipment and infantry were turned to dust. Also, the Ukrainian armed forces took out top Russian officers. All of this and more in our broadcast. Hotspot. Here we go. Orban was cornered. The EU, surprised with the decision. The leadership of the European Union found a brilliant way to tame the Hungarian Prime Minister. Now, he won't be able to block important decisions, especially those concerning support for Ukraine. All the details in our report.
On March 7th, during the EU summit in Brussels, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban once again blocked military aid to Ukraine. Out of the 27 EU countries, only Hungary is putting obstacles in the way of European integration and aid to Ukraine. In the old world, they have even found a compromise with Slovakia and Fico. But Orban continues to adhere to a pro-Kremlin policy.
After March 6th, no one had any doubts that there are disagreements with one member state. The goal should always be to reach conclusions with all 27. If this is not possible, if the strategic division persists, and we have every indication that it will, then we move forward with 26.
Politico reports that after the summit in early March, the EU found a way to make decisions bypassing Orban's veto. This time, the Hungarian Prime Minister was unable to influence new initiatives regarding military aid and Ukraine's Euro integration.
You see, this is, Bill, a temporary mechanism. This is not the mechanism that is truly needed. Well, the European Union still needs to carry out a certain reform, and according to the challenges it faces now, like never before in the entire existence of the European Union, to standardize its documents, its charter, according to the fact that there can be countries like Hungary.
On March 23rd, in Brussels, after Orban once again blocked further proposals regarding Ukraine, a decision on this issue was made as an addition to other resolutions signed by the remaining members of the European Union. In other words, the EU made a decision without Hungary, and this approach has become the new norm. This was stated anonymously to the publication by one of the high-ranking European diplomats.
Orban has chosen isolation and the path of illiberal democracy contrary to the ongoing interests of the EU and essentially Hungary. He was given many opportunities, but he rejected the extended hand. The security of Europe is too serious a matter. To negotiate with one person who sees things 180 degrees differently than everyone else.
All EU countries are ready to move forward and make decisions without Hungary. The decision made in Brussels bypassing Orban indicates a strategic shift in the European Union.
Today, Hungary indeed causes a lot of, let's say, and I think dissatisfaction and misunderstanding among many politicians in the European Union and its citizens. If you are members of the European Union, you cannot behave in a manner completely opposite by 180 degrees to the entire European Union, otherwise you are not members of the European Union.
The EU supports Trump's attempts to initiate peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, but that is still very far off. And the fact that the Kremlin is not ready to concede and cease fire was demonstrated by the massive shelling of Ukraine over the past weekend. Europe sees a solution to the issue only if Ukraine is strong and ready to help us.
The European Union maintains its peace through strength approach, which requires Ukraine to be in the strongest possible position, with its own powerful military and defense capabilities as a crucial component. Political publication.
The decisions made bypassing Orban's veto at the Brussels summit are a temporary measure. But conceptually, the EU is inclined to no longer face the issue of bans from the Hungarian Prime Minister. Since Europe fully supports Ukraine's fight for its territory,
Urgent. The Ukrainian armed forces have created a real hell for the occupiers. The enemy is burning along with their equipment. A failed assault by Russia. This has never happened before. The Ukrainian army is sweeping the enemy from the front. Russian attempts at offensives are failing one after another. The Ukrainian armed forces are destroying the equipment and manpower of the occupiers, and the battles for Toretsk are intensifying. What is happening on the front line right now? Shocking details in the report.
The Ukrainian armed forces continue to annihilate the enemy. This time, the Russian assault on the Lyman direction has been stopped. Despite the intense attacks, our defenders are destroying the enemy's assault groups even as they approach the positions. And this is already the Pokrovsky direction. Here, Ukrainian soldiers stopped the enemy, preventing them from advancing. Right now you can see how Russian equipment is being destroyed during the assault. Moreover, the Russian occupiers are marching to their deaths following the criminal orders of their command. They are constantly suffering losses during training on crossing water obstacles in the occupied part of the Kherson region.
There are several reasons. First, the unpreparedness of the personnel. Second, the lack of watercraft. And third, the fire impact from the Ukrainian armed forces. The islands in the Dnipro floodplain in the Kherson direction are under the total fire control of the Ukrainian defense forces. Therefore, any attempts either to conduct so-called exercises or to carry out landing operations are strictly suppressed by the Ukrainian defense forces.
Meanwhile, according to Deep State, Russian troops have managed to advance in the areas of 3 settlements in the Donetsk region.
At the moment, we can speak of certain tactical successes of the Russian occupiers in the Novopolok direction and the Lyman direction. In the Lyman direction, there are heavy battles in the area of the settlements of Bohuslavka, Novoho, and accordingly the Novopolok direction. Heavy fighting is occurring in the area of Konstantinopol and Razliv. The occupiers are trying to create a threat of operational encirclement in the Novopolok direction by deploying additional personnel and using armored vehicles. The main task is to break through the defense of the Ukrainian forces with the threat of flanking the Pokrovska group of our defenders.
The occupiers are also attempting to flank Toretsk. Overall, the intensity of combat operations in the city has increased.
In Toretsk, the number of skirmishes has sharply increased, again due to the operational reserves of the Russian occupation army from the 8th Combined Arms Army. Currently, the task of the occupiers is to push the Ukrainian defense forces out of Toretsk itself and attempt to take direct control of the Toretsk-Konstantinovka highway. In addition to direct street fighting, the occupiers are attempting to break through the Ukrainian defense forces by using underground collectors, that is, the sewage system, leveraging the experience from battles in the Avdiivka industrial zone and recent events in the Kursk region.
Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War predict that the Russian army is preparing to intensify offensive actions on several front sections in the spring and summer of 25th year.
A sharp intensification of hostilities along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front is occurring precisely against the backdrop of so-called peace negotiations. The occupiers are trying to use the so-called window of opportunity, fully understanding that pressure from the United States increases at the moment of concluding peace negotiations. Therefore, the main task of the occupiers, against the backdrop of the imitation of intense, in quotes, diplomatic activity, is to try to maximize the improvement of their tactical position with the aim of reaching the administrative borders, primarily of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. But in addition to this, there is a sharp intensification of combat clashes in the territory of the Zaporizhzhia region and accordingly the Sumy and Kharkiv regions.
Whatever plans the Kremlin may have, the armed forces of Ukraine are ready to fight the enemy and protect their people from the occupiers. And even though the enemy continues to attack in all directions of the front, Ukraine continues to work on producing its own drones, states President Zelensky.
There are new decisions regarding investments in our defense industry, particularly in the production of Ukrainian drones. And our warriors have achieved good results in using certain types of drones to protect our cities.
Earlier, Zelensky had already reported Ukraine will not only increase the production of drones, but will also focus on improving the capabilities of our UAVs to overcome electronic warfare and air defense.
The production of strike drones, ITEM, with a range of over 2,000 kilometers is developing, and accordingly we have a total advantage in FPV drones. In addition, the Ukrainian Defense Forces and Ukroboronpromo are actively developing their own missile program. This is not only the modernization of old S-200s, but also, accordingly, the possibility of using the so-called long Neptune.
At this moment, the Ukrainian Air Force is attacking Russia. Shocking footage. The Ukrainian armed forces continue their advance in the Belgorod region. Fighter jets are already in action. Soon we will show footage of the destruction of an ammunition depot and enemy military facilities. Meanwhile, our fighters have eliminated high-ranking officers of the occupiers in the Kherson region. The losses for the Russians are colossal. Watch what is happening on the front line right now.
In these frames, you can see the work of Ukrainian aviation on military targets in the Russian Federation. They were published by the monitoring project Deep State. According to analysts' analysis, the attacks were carried out in the settlements of Demidovka and Kondratovka in the Belgorod region.
I remind you, the total number of Russian army troops in the Belgorod region is up to 50,000 personnel. Furthermore, it should be noted that the Ukrainian Defense Forces managed to break through the so-called Zasichny lines, or as the Russians call them, Surovikin lines. Approximately $200 million were spent on these engineering fortifications by the Russian authorities from both the central and local budgets.
According to a local public source, a drone attack in the village of Ivanovskaya Lisitsa set fire to an ammunition depot that the Russian military had organized in an uninhabited apartment building.
I really hope that all of us can return to our native villages, engage in reconstruction, and return to peaceful life. I am confident that it will be so.
Ukrainian military forces continue combat operations on Russian territory, including in the Belgorod region. Russian propagandists report ongoing clashes, while according to Reuters, the Ukrainian armed forces may have advanced several kilometers into Russian territory.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine does not comment on the situation in the Belgorod direction, but according to Western media, Ukrainian defense forces have advanced into Russian territory in the Belgorod region by a distance of 3 to 4 kilometers. Heavy fighting is taking place in the areas of the settlements of Demidovka, Popovka, and Grakovka. The Ukrainian defense forces are conducting combined attacks, both on the positions of the occupying country's armed forces and on the rear logistical infrastructure.
Meanwhile, on Ukrainian territory, there have been about 200 combat clashes in the last 24 hours.
This indicates an intensification of hostilities. Russian troops are trying to use so-called peace negotiations to create preconditions for lifting economic sanctions. But at the same time, there is an increase in the activity of Russian troops directly on the combat line.
The invaders continue their attempts to break through in the Lyman direction. However, despite the intense attacks, Ukrainian soldiers are fighting back, destroying enemy assault groups even as they approach the positions. As actively as the Russians appear in Ukraine, they are being eliminated. For example, a MiG-29 crew precisely drops and destroys high-ranking officer personnel along with equipment at one of the enemy's points in the temporarily occupied Oleshki in the Kherson region. And in this video, operators of the 6th Regiment of the Special Operations Forces capture Russian military personnel in the Kursk region. And this is precisely at the time when propaganda is claiming that our armed forces are supposedly fleeing from the Kursk region.
The enemy is trying to attack the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the area of Kyiv. The Ukrainian Defense Forces maintain a control zone in the territory of the Kursk region. This is about 150 square kilometers. According to reports from Russian media, during intense fighting in the Kursk region, hero of Russia Major Marat Kipilov was killed.
And to replace those eliminated, Putin signed another decree for the conscription of occupiers into the army. The conscription in Russia will begin on April 1st and will last until July 15th. In total, about 160,000 people will be conscripted. This number will be the highest since 2011. In addition to paper summons, Russian citizens will also receive electronic ones. And it seems that Russians will not be learning to serve, but as is customary for conscripts, they will be immediately thrown into practice.
As of today, in the Belgorod region, it is precisely the conscripts of the armed forces of the Russian Federation who are actively engaged in combat operations in the area of Popovka and Demidov. Meanwhile, the Akhmat units once again missed the armed forces of Ukraine.
But that's not all the news from the Kremlin dictator. Russia has a 100% probability of invading one of the European countries in the coming years. According to French military experts, Europeans believe that a full-scale war seems unlikely. However, they do not rule out that Russia might undertake a limited invasion of a European country's territory and resort to so-called hybrid warfare.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The latest assault by Russian military forces was successfully repelled by Ukrainian defense forces in the Volchansk direction. Meanwhile, fighters from the Forepost Brigade used FPV drones to finish off the enemy's armored vehicles, according to the press service. As a result, the invaders' multi-purpose armored personnel carriers and an ammunition depot were burned to the ground. In other sectors of the front, Russian occupiers also continue their attacks, particularly in the Kupiansk direction. The Russian army launched assaults in the areas of Peshanoye, Stepnaya Novosilovka, Novaya Krugliakovka, and Zagrizovo. In the Seversk area, battles were taking place in the regions of Belogorovka, Ivanodaryevka, Verkhnekamenskoye, and Serebryanka. The Pokrovsk direction remains the hottest. The invaders launched assaults near Alexandropol, Yelizavetovka, Novoalexandrovka, Andreevka, as well as near Bogdanovka and Romanovka.
In recent days, to a certain extent, there has been an increase in Russian activity along the entire front line, regardless of the directions there in the main areas of the offensive. The same Pokrovsk salient evidently remains. The main direction of the Russian offensive strike in the Donetsk region, which by and large has stalled, or rather our defenders have stopped it. In other directions, on the flanks, in Toretsk, in Chasiv Yar, in the south, in Kostiantynivka, in the north, Kupiansk, Lyman.
In the Kramatorsk direction, Ukrainian forces delivered a serious blow to the Russian military, who were attempting to break through to the forward positions on motorcycles. Despite the invaders' tactic of a rapid breakthrough under the cover of dense fog, Ukrainian forces responded promptly. The successful operation by the 5th Assault Brigade with the help of drones led to the elimination of 18 Russian motorcyclists, the destruction of 3 armored vehicles, and 2 enemy cars. The Russians are also attempting to break through the Ukrainian defense in Chasiv Yar. According to the operational strategic grouping of troops Khortytsia, the invaders are throwing more and more forces into battle despite enormous losses. For instance, the warriors of the King Danilo Brigade, together with the National Guard, eliminated elite units of the airborne troops of the Russian occupation army.
Given the number of forces the Russians are deploying, the Donetsk direction remains key. And there has been no change here. The Russians would like to eventually complete, so to speak, in quotes, their operation in the Kursk region. And these troops, these reserves tied up there to be redeployed to another direction. Where would they like to implement this? Within the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, to move them south to the Kupiansk and Lyman directions. They are short of people everywhere.
And near Toretsk in the Donetsk region, fighters from the Kizak Brigade of the National Police captured 3 Russians. The captured soldiers immediately stated that they no longer want to fight for the Russian Federation and want to join the Russian Volunteer Corps. The captives spent several days at the positions of the Ukrainian infantry, after which they were transported and handed over to the appropriate authorities.
Orban.
The major offensive has begun. Russia is pushing forward in 3 directions. Near Pokrovsk, there are hellish battles. Zelensky sounds the alarm. The occupiers are preparing a powerful attack in Sumy, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia. Meanwhile, near Pokrovsk, the Russian army is unleashing a barrage of strikes on Ukrainian positions. What is happening right now on the front line? Breaking news from the front in our video.
Russia is preparing a new offensive on 3 regions of Ukraine. This was reported the day before by Volodymyr Zelensky, citing our intelligence data.
Putin wants to carry out several offensive actions, as we said, to continue in the east on the Zaporizhia, Kharkiv and Sumy directions. He will try to do this. For what purpose? In order to exert maximum pressure on Ukraine. When will this happen? Believe me, he will try to do all this in the coming months.
Analysts believe that an intensification of combat clashes is to be expected at the end of April, beginning of May, primarily due to weather conditions. Moreover, this will be another attempt to sway the world to his terms of peace during negotiations.
He needs to demonstrate momentum, pace, to show that the longer you refuse to agree to surrender, the sooner I will achieve this result by military means. And undoubtedly, the offensive military campaign will certainly begin in the summer.
Military experts say that offensives on Sumy, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia do not necessarily mean that Russia can exert equal pressure in all directions. Some analysts believe that the main strike will be carried out only in the direction of the Sumy region.
Well, in the Kursk region, they were indeed able to, liberate Sumy and so on. They will undoubtedly try to create more favorable conditions for themselves, specifically in this area.
However, it is also expected that the enemy will concentrate the main strike from the south on Zaporizhzhia.
Any major offensive operation is not conducted in just one place. Usually, at least two directions are chosen, but in reality, it's 3 or 4. Which one of them will be the most intense is hard to say. It can be expected that it will still be the southern direction, but for some reason, it seems intuitively so, judging by the fact that the Russians are somehow not preparing. Well, that the fight will continue in the Pokrovsky direction is also obvious. There has already been recorded an accumulation, not a concentration, an accumulation of Russian troops.
Which, by the way, so far does not bring any results for the Russians here. As reported by the military on the ground, the armed forces of Ukraine fully control the situation in the Pokrovsky area. And the reinforcement by Russia is primarily due to the inability to show results.
The enemy is now simply forced to use more equipment as well as forces and personnel, because the command of the Joint Forces operation in Khortytsia, the command of the Operational Tactical Group Donetsk, has completely stabilized the front as of today.
Meanwhile, the main strategy today, as before, remains the attempt to cut off our units from logistics.
The enemy currently has one goal. They are gathering equipment and manpower, both to the left and right of Pokrovsk, planning to get onto the Kostiantynivka-Pokrovsk highway and approach the Pavlohrad-Pokrovsk highway.
The occupiers have little chance of achieving this. Losing more than 1,000 soldiers daily, about 70% of these losses for Russia occur specifically in the Pokrovsk direction, which is indirectly acknowledged even by Z military correspondents and propaganda on Russian TV.
As of today, the Russians are no longer writing that they are approaching the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region, because this approach truly turns into a bloody path for them. As of now, this is very important because the Dnipropetrovsk region is already closer to the center of Ukraine.
However, the Russians do not abandon attempts to advance. According to Ukrainian authorities, it is precisely Putin's desire to wage war that is mainly linked to the unproductive negotiations between Washington and Moscow. Analysts suggest that the bunker leader engaged in dialogue with the states merely as a diversion. In reality, his absurd demands for a ceasefire are only needed to continue the war. And considering such an attitude in Moscow, it is very timely that the leaders of European countries have become more active in the matter of sending their troops to Ukraine, which, by the way, could completely upset Putin's plans.
If we are to talk about the mission, the European one, we are discussing it should be carried out no later than April-May, so that these contingents that have already appeared do not allow the advancement or maneuvering of this offensive. It may begin, but it will already be clear that Kyiv will not be taken, and say Lviv will not be taken, because there are foreign troops stationed there and they are covering the sky and military equipment is being brought in. Yes, do you understand the logic? Yes? So even Moscow will stop here and say, well, how are we going to go on? Who knows what this will lead to?
Zelensky, even commenting on the preparation of the Russians for a new offensive, responded briefly, "The whole world sees that Russia is striving to continue the war, and therefore partner countries should strengthen sanctions against the Russian Federation and develop a joint plan for the deployment of forces to ensure security guarantees. And the sooner, the better."
Exclusive, the latest Ukrainian weapon, a naval drone that will turn the Russian fleet into scrap. Ukrainian engineers have created a unique weapon that could become a nightmare for the occupiers. A powerful naval drone is already on combat duty and ready to strike. How will it change the course of the war? Details of the secret development that will shock the enemy. Watch right now.
We have all the capabilities to produce all types of drones, many types of equipment, artillery needed in battles.
New standards of modern warfare.
I am proud of the Ukrainian developers from the Bravo 1 cluster. You are creating unique technologies not only for Ukraine, but for the world.
Now Ukraine has a unique maritime drone, the secret Katran. It was showcased by the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, Mikhailo Fedorov. Katran is an unmanned boat equipped with torpedoes, a machine gun, a minigun, an anti-aircraft missile system, and other types of weaponry. It can cover more than 1,000 kilometers. It is also called a real game changer at sea and beyond. This until recently secret weapon is capable of destroying targets at sea, on land, and in the air. Russian propagandists have become noticeably nervous.
On the day when the US and Russia announced agreements regarding plans for shipping security in the Black Sea, Ukraine announced the emergence of its new maritime drone, Katran.
The Katran family has several modifications. It is presumed that Katran was involved in the attack on the drilling platforms in the Black Sea, where it launched a torpedo, a small kamikaze drone. In early March, the Russian Telegram channel Fighter Bomber wrote about this operation and Katran. It clearly described the operation of our drone at sea.
Right now, there is a battle going on in the Black Sea. They are attacking our gas extraction facility with BCs and are using a relatively new BC type, Katran Venom. On board, there is also a paired manpads and 2 machine guns, one of which is a 6-barrel minigun. Optical guidance system with a thermal imaging channel.
And the enemy indeed has something to fear. Venom is a technological breakthrough.
Katran Venom is an innovative autonomous platform for conducting complex assault operations on water and coastal areas, featuring advanced protection systems, artificial intelligence, and sensors.
Ukraine has showcased to the world numerous variants of domestically produced drones. Ukraine first used unmanned boats against the Russian fleet in the fall of 22 and has been modifying them since then. They were also used for attacks on the frigate Admiral Makarov.
This was the first remote naval operation in history. Surface drones received their baptism of fire, but it was then that we realized they needed to be larger and carry more explosives to be effectively destructive.
Another drone was Mamai, which was showcased in the fall of 22. These drones, as reported by Russian Telegram channels, were used for attacks on the Olenigorsky Gornyak BDK and the CIG tanker in Novorossiysk in August 23. Their high autonomy makes them an ideal option for long-distance attacks. Then came Magura, which eventually became the main drone used by the GUR. It quite freely covered the distance of 800 kilometers to the Crimean Bridge from Odessa. The Magura V-5 destroyed the most Russian ships during the full-scale war. Not only ships, the Magura V-5 boat shot down a Russian Mi-8 helicopter Another drone that has carried out many successful operations is the Sia Baby. This drone was used in the attack on the Crimean Bridge in July 23rd.
In the year 2023, the Crimean Bridge was hit by 2 Sia Baby drones. It burst like a soap bubble, and along with it, the myth that it was untouchable, unreachable, and impossible to hit also burst.
Our Sia Baby is not just a drone, but a multifunctional platform that is constantly being improved.
This is a new milestone in the history of naval battles. For the first time, the SBU used the Sia Baby drone, equipped with Grad multiple rocket launch systems, in December 2023.
The SBU drones attacked Russian helicopters, planes, and boats in the Kerch Bay. After brilliant attacks on Russian warships, the occupiers had to transfer part of the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. But even there, our combat drones found them. Unmanned surface vehicles expand the capabilities of the defense forces. They help strike the occupiers' forces in coastal areas, for example, near the coast of the occupied part of the Kherson region, or near Crimea. Their numbers are growing every day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that more than 30% of the weapons used on the battlefield are of Ukrainian production.
Domestic production has increased and can supply and strengthen our troops. And this is very important, drones, electronic warfare, and more.
Ukrainian sea drones have turned the tide of the war in the Black Sea. Ukraine has managed to, in an impressive manner, outperform and outmaneuver a much stronger and wealthier adversary.
That's all for now. For more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.